called it the death glacier. It was just like full of holes, full of snow bridges, trying to eat us. And I like turn my walking poles horizontal to try and get some support. And I push up and I turn to Waldo and I go, I think I'm And as I go to say okay, the snow bridge collapses and I just plummet like 3, 4 meters.
So, Matt, from the outside, you lead a life, you work a job that is unimaginable to most people. You're hanging out with some of the very best climbers and athletes in the world. You're going to Greenland, you're going to South America, to places that should be in a movie and in fact are in movies thanks to you. And this is a career that most people can't even imagine exists, and when they realize that it exists, they think there's no way to get from here to there. They can't even see the path. So my first question is, how the hell did you end up dangling off of ropes and filming Alex Honnold climbing some godforsaken cliff in Greenland?
Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, I still have to pinch myself on a very regular basis. And it's funny, maybe we'll get into this later, but I quite regularly have, oh, maybe now I've made it moments. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's, well, I probably never have. There's always somewhere else to go. But yeah, I didn't know this was a thing either when I was young at all. Um, and I'll do you the short version now, and you can choose where we go with it. But I was not a gifted kid when it comes to like athletic pursuits or anything like that. I wasn't creative. I would definitely say I was not a creative child. Um, I was curious. I think that's like the word my mum would use. I was very, very curious. But I didn't get on well at secondary school at all. As a teenager, I really struggled. I was quite academic, but I didn't apply myself. I was quite badly bullied at school and no self confidence, no self worth. I didn't really go to school when I was 15, 16. My parents got in trouble because of that. And when I was 16 years old, school sent me on an outward bound course, which, for those who don't know, I got sent into the wilds of Scotland for 3 weeks to go and walk in the hills, go kayaking, do some top rope climbing, went on a mini expedition, which with hindsight, was 3 days carrying too much stuff and sleeping in the rain. And at the end of that experience, you sit down with your instructor, and they often send the kind of the disenfranchised kids on these trips, whether it's because they're naughty or whether it's because they've got no self confidence or whether it's because they're a bit of both, which some people are. And the instructor said to me, "So what now?" And I remember quite specifically and vividly having this finger snap moment of, because I didn't know, I just thought I'd have to go back and do, 17, 18 um, at school. And I didn't really want to do that. Um, and I just had this moment where I said to him, "Well, can I do what you do?" And he
Mm.
said, "Yeah, you can do what I do." And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And he said, "Well, I'm an outdoor instructor." I was like, "Okay, outdoor instructor. I'm going to be an outdoor instructor." So anyway, fast forward. I decide I'm going to be an outdoor instructor. I get off the train from this experience, and my mum and dad have got my exam results in their hand in an envelope, and they're nervous, and I'm nervous. But I say to them, we don't need to be nervous because I'm going to move to the English Lake District, northwest England. I grew up in a place without any hills or mountains, one of the flattest counties in England. And I did. I moved there when I was 16
At
years
what
old.
age? 16.
16. Yeah, just left home and went. And I did a college course in outdoor leadership. Gonna have to fast forward a lot of stuff here. I'll be here for 5 hours, but I broke my arm really badly, um, and I had to take a year off. I had to have multiple surgeries. I still have two fingers that don't work, but don't tell any of my clients or Alex Honnold. Um, yeah, I'm aware most people will be listening to this, but the two middle fingers on my right hand don't extend fully, so I have full grip strength, but I can't extend.
Hmm.
And so I decided at this point I was going to become a mountain guide, formal mountain guide, and that just died in that moment. Basically, I realized I was never going to be a good rock climber. Um, and this I guess is the key bit. I didn't know what to do, and my college tutor said, "Well, there's this brand new degree program, Adventure Media, and they haven't got enough applicants for the course. It's on the same campus, so I can basically just get you in with any grades." So I was like, "Yeah, that sounds fun. I get to stay where I am now, go out in the hills with my friends for a few more years." Signed on to that. And for the first year, really didn't apply myself that much. I just spent a lot of time out in the Lake District playing. we would kind of roll into lectures at 9 a.m. covered in mud from sleeping on the hills the night before. And then suddenly I fell into cameras, and it wasn't that magic moment where somebody says, and it just gripped me and I was gone. It wasn't like that. I just started taking photos for my assignments, and eventually, I don't want to say it was a chance, but I met a Polish climbing photographer called Lucas Wojcicka, um, who, it's a long story how I got there, but I ended up interning for him for one event in Sheffield in the centre of England at a climbing competition, like holding his light stands. And then he said, "Hey, I'm going out to Chamonix in a few weeks. Do you want to
Oh,
just come with me?" And, it was really easy stuff. Again, hold my light stands, carry my bags. I'm like, yeah, obviously. I'm still at
so
university at this
Chamonix
point.
is like the, I don't know, the holy grail, or that's the wrong analogy. The central location of climbing in Europe, pretty
Yeah.
much. Every
Yeah.
extreme sport starts there, ends there. Everybody trains there.
Yeah. And it's got one of the richest alpine histories in the world. I mean, it's even a pilgrimage for a lot of American climbers. Chamonix is where you go to test yourself. Um, and yeah, the story keeps going like that. I did a lot with him for a year. Didn't go to university for a year. They let me not go. I just did my assignments on the road. Then I landed a job. I suppose I should backtrack slightly. Like, suddenly I'm starting to realize that people make money in the mountains with cameras, and I was like, I should do that. And I was trying to work out if there was this other career path for me going into the military, joining the Royal Marines, but that all sort of died with my radius injury as well. So
Mm.
I really was like putting all my, eggs in one basket and running forwards with them. And I just thought, well, I'm going to give this a go. I don't have kids. I'm not married. Like, let's see what happens. And I lived in a van and lived on pasta for a really long time. Finished university and got a job working for an outdoor, like, climbing film production company. And that, if that sounds mad then, now it was mad then. Like, there were not many in Britain. There were two, and I got a job with one of them. Was their first employee, and I spent 2 years making climbing films with them, abseiling into sea cliffs that are 400 meters high when I've never abseiled before, working it out like on the rope, which I would not recommend, like how to pass knots, um, working out how to use cameras on ropes, getting it all wrong, and then opportunity came up to go to Africa, to sort of put the climbing to one side. And long story short, I started working as a clandestine journalist in sub-Saharan Africa.
What is a clandestine journalist?
Well, I didn't realize this was what I
Huh.
was doing at the time. So I'm 21, and it's really interesting reflecting on this because, I haven't done many podcasts where I'm on this side of the mic, and I don't get asked this question often because I don't talk about it often. Um, but basically, we were lying our way through immigration. So tourists or science assistants, taking in, it was just at the time where stills cameras had a record function stuck onto them and people hadn't caught on yet. So we were taking tourist style stills cameras into
Mm.
countries, and then we were being paid by certain organizations to go and document what was really happening on the ground. At one point, we pretended to be um, investors in a soybean factory, to go and actually check out the quality of the structure, and take photographs of the quality. And
We get it. You were MI6. What was your double O designation?
yeah, it was. Well, it would have
Double O
been.
one.
Yeah. No, they'd probably been 96 if it was me. But um, no, it did feel like that at times. I'm 21. It's exciting. I'm doing
What
things.
countries were you in?
I mean, it's a long list. Kenya, Ghana, Malawi, Mozambique, Rwanda, and then there were a few more, and then the Congo was where I stopped doing this work, kind of by accident again. But we got smuggled into the Congo, um, not like you'd imagine in a Tom Cruise movie, but we weren't supposed to be there. And it was when there was a big, I mean, there's still conflict there, but conflict there between rebels and the government, and we were on the wrong road at the wrong time. Um, and we got stopped on the road, and I was with like an older kind of mentor figure, 20 years older than me, and he, these are like tactical, technical vehicles, machine guns mounted on pillars, lots of like young looking soldiers who are clearly high. And he just said to me, "If I run, you run." And I was like, "Okay, this is it then. This is where it ends." Um, because I've seen a lot of war movies and I was 21 years old. I'm like, I get this. I know what's about to happen. Anyway, on our knees, hand over the passports, and it's going to sound like bullshit, but a guy in like snakeskin boots and a waistcoat and a cowboy hat gets out this car, and we're like, okay, it's definitely over. And he walks over, he starts talking to us. I don't speak. I'm like looking at the ground. It turns out he's the local governor, and that's how he's dressed. And he invites us to like his, you know, mansion that night for dinner. And we're like, oh, sorry, we're very busy. Sends us on our way. We carry on with the work, go to this research base, fly home, and next thing I know, I'm flying home. The fridge is empty. I go to the supermarket. I sit down on the floor of the milk aisle, and I just remember looking at all the milk, and I looked at the tops and the brands, and I was like, do I need green milk or blue milk or red milk? How much milk do I need? What's that? What's zero? And I just sat down on the floor of the milk aisle and cried and left the shop with nothing.
How long was this after your your near death experience in the Congo?
I mean, that happened 2 days before we flew home. And
Okay.
then, yeah, that day, I guess I landed, took a
Okay.
cab home, and that was that. But I mean, we don't have to go here now if you want to go here at all. But
Well,
it's a really interesting thing, 15 years on from that, looking at that experience, because I always wondered if I had some sort of PTSD that I never dealt with. And it was only when I interviewed an ex Special Forces soldier, and I did speak about this at the time really briefly. And he said, what if it was PTG? Like, what if it was post traumatic growth? What if that
mm,
feeling you had in the milk aisle was actually just like this dump valve, just like letting out what's happened to you for the first time, processing what's happened to you, because I didn't show any of the signs of PTSD afterwards. If anything, I think post milk aisle, I was a very different person. It changed
how were you
me.
different? Like what immediately in the weeks that followed that?
Well,
I've never heard this term post traumatic growth. I love it.
yeah,
Uh, I'm a little bit worried in the sense my first reaction is, ugh, hang on, because now this is going to be thrown at everybody who is suffering from PTSD. Oh, good. You're unable to sleep at night. You go into, you have complete breakdowns. This is great. This is PTG, and join my mentorship mastermind to help channel your PTG.
totally. And I think, your disclaimer is perfect. Like, I am not a mental health expert and I am not a scientist or a psychotherapist or, I'm a photographer. Um, but I
Well,
do
you're
think
also
it's
a
interesting.
podcaster. You're also a podcaster, which makes you pretty much an expert on everything
Yeah, yeah,
in
totally.
2024. Yeah.
Yeah, all my opinions are fact. Yeah. No, I think what it was, the thing with PTG, if and this, I don't even know if it's an official term, I just like it,
Hmm.
is if you think about any sort of type 2 fun. So if you go out into the mountains and you go ice climbing and you get snowed on all day and you get scared, and you get down to the bar and you have a beer with your friends, you have technically had some form of traumatic experience. Trauma is an interesting word, right? But you're seeking that traumatic experience. And there's a reason that professional rock climbers, mountaineers, and soldiers, special forces soldiers, get invited to do keynote speeches about leadership. You know, we grow from these experiences, they forge us, and that can go wrong. And you can develop something like PTSD, which needs formal medical assistance. I've not been there. I don't know what that's
Hmm.
like. I've had my mental health problems, as you know, and we can talk about those, but they weren't from Africa. I think, to answer your question, like how I changed, I told you I was bullied at school. I had no self confidence. I was 5'3". I couldn't do sports. Coming back from Africa, well, I'd grown a lot. My shoulders went pop and I got broad. And then I've done all this stuff in Africa. I've abseiled into sea cliffs. And it took me a long time to realize that what I'd done when I moved to the Lake District was I pretended to be a different person. I pretended to be a big, brave, strong man. I sort of pretended to be like an alpha male as I saw it then, right? And there's some toxicity to that we should be careful of because of what happened later. But I became one. That's the thing.
Hmm.
It was like by pretending to be this person, the imposter syndrome was profound. But actually, I was like, well, yeah, I'm going to do that because the experience, the opportunity's there. I'm going to say
Yeah.
yes. And suddenly I just became a big, brave, strong man. And I think that, coming back from the Congo, it kind of cemented, well, you did the job. you did the job well, you survived the job, and you kind of enjoyed the job. Like maybe you are that person.
Mm.
And that still exists for me now. I come back from trips with Alex Honnold and I'm like, I go out there and I'm like, they've got the wrong person. Oh no, I've silver tongued my way into this. Like, I'm so fucked. I don't know how to do this. And then I get to the end and I go, oh, I think I nailed that. Okay, cool. And then the imposter syndrome hits again. And I spend a lot of my life riding the imposter syndrome ego seesaw, um,
Mm.
which I think a lot of us ride.
Mm. So you mentioned mental health problems, but you said that they weren't related to Congo.
Yeah.
So there,
I
there's
mean,
a, is there a gap in your
yeah.
outdoor resume from
Yeah,
that?
and we can fast forward a bit. So, after I came back from the Congo, I started a film production company, ran that for a lot of years, and it went well. Like I was poor for a long time, but I didn't need much money. I just made movies and traveled the
Mm.
world almost full time. Met my now wife, who was and is a theatre actress and soprano, and she was always on tour, always on the road. So it was like perfect lifestyle. Um, and yeah, to cut to it, when I was 28, I basically went on a family holiday and I'd had a lot of problems with the business. I'd I'd clearly been like hide. I'm going to struggle to talk about this, but I'm going to do it. I had been hiding from a lot of issues that were going on in my head that, with hindsight, I knew were there, and I just went pop. And I've never ever had a problem with alcohol. I'm not even much of a big drinker, but I just started drinking at 10 a.m. I had a big fallout with a couple of people the day before, and by midday, I'm blind drunk. By 3 p.m., I've hand carved a silver bullet for everyone I love who's in that building, and I fired it at them. And I just, I have a lot of
In
fluff.
your mind?
No, I said it all out loud. So
Okay.
I found their deepest, darkest insecurities, knowing them as well as I did, and I weaponized them and
Okay. So
basically hit.
a metaphorical gun, a
Yes.
metaphorical silver
Sorry, I
bullet.
realize
Okay.
I'm English, not North
Yeah.
American. I shouldn't
Yeah.
use the weapons reference,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, no, it
Well,
was yeah,
we don't have as many in Canada as
yeah, yeah,
just south
yeah,
of the border. So
yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead.
But no, yeah, I weaponized these insecurities and basically tried to destroy everything
Really,
around me. And with hindsight, it was a self destruction exercise. Um, and I had a lot of
it's kind
therapy.
of slamming your hand down on the social self destruct button.
Yeah, it came from a place of self loathing, I think,
Mm.
because, like I said to you, I pretended to be this person for a really long time. Was I actually this person? Well, in some ways, yeah, I was like courageous. I was brave. I'm scared of that word too. I think we need to be careful with that word. But I was brave. I was bold. I was ambitious. I was generally a good person. But, some of the ways I've been behaving, um, very selfishly, very career driven, but it all came from this insecurity of like I wasn't somebody. I've got a lot to
Mm.
prove to the world, and yeah, recovering from that was really difficult. But I, as I tend to do with most things, I kind of grabbed it by the horns and said, "Well, we're doing this at 100 miles an hour. We're not doing it." So, which is a strength in some ways and a flaw in others for sure. I don't know how to do anything slowly or by halves, which you know can be a problem.
Yeah.
Um, but I had a specific type of therapy called cognitive analytic therapy, which just completely transformed. It solved the problem and it transformed me as a person because 3 months in, the lady I was seeing every week said, "I don't feel like you need to be here anymore." And I said to her, "Yeah, but I feel like I was at one and then I fell to zero and now you've got me back to one." I was like, "Is there a 10? Like, what does 10 look like?" Because I feel like if I just get back to one, this is going to keep happening. I need to solve these problems and I need to build myself into this better person. And I went on this incredible journey of like self awareness exploration. Like, what do I really stand for? What do I really care about? Where is the toxicity in my life? And now I feel like, and I say this, I hope with zero arrogance, I am a big, brave, strong man who is also capable of being vulnerable, emotional, scared, embarrassed, worried. I am in touch with these emotions in a way that I never was before. My background, my upbringing, my only negative emotion available to me was anger. So I turned everything into
Mm.
anger. And that's still there sometimes now, but my wife, knowing me as she does, is able to pinpoint when it's happening, and she'll go, "Are you angry?" And I'll go, "No, I'm scared. I'm
I'm
scared."
not
Right.
angry.
Yeah, 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 exactly. So
What is, I've heard of cognitive behavioral therapy. I've never heard of cognitive analytical therapy. So what is that? Again, you're not a psychologist, but what does that work look like?
no, as I understand it, they're almost at opposite ends of the spectrum. So
Right.
behavioral therapy is looking at specific behaviors, as I understand it. All those disclaimers there related to addiction, bad behavior, um, alcoholism, whatever it might be. Analytic therapy is much more introspective, almost like philosophical. It You really unpack who you are and your value system, and it's very conversational. It's very led by you. It's really, they dig and dig and dig, and I don't think it would suit everyone. It requires you to basically, unzip your chest, take everything out, put it on a table, and say, you can look at all of this. And you do the Freudian stuff, like you go back into your childhood and look at certain things that have happened to you. And we talked so much about school. We talked so much about
Mm.
some of the negative people in my life and the things that they'd done, um, that I we needed to get over. And I'm aware that like we inevitably want to talk about some cool stuff that's happened, and we're on a depressive ramble. But like my dad, at the time that this happened, my dad had cancer and he died a few years ago. But there's a positive to this, right? Like he saw the fall, but he also saw me build back up, and
Mm-hmm.
he was worried about me before the fall. And I had a really
It sounds like they
complicated,
were worried about you for most of your school era and afterwards.
totally,
Oh
yeah,
my God, what is this kid gonna do?
yeah. And the runaway. I mean, how I've interviewed so many people who I'm like, you're so obviously running away from something. Well,
Mm.
I was that guy too. Um, but with my dad, I got the opportunity to like forgive him for lots of the things that I think most people have some sort of dad issue, right? Like they're all in there
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. The world needs better men. But I was able to forgive him for a lot of things that had happened without needing to talk to him about it before he died. So my
Mm-hmm.
relationship with him when he finally did die, I got this immense peace from it. And so, I'm going to just, I'm seriously advocating, if somebody feels like they want or need therapy, it was one of the most amazing things I've ever done. It saved my marriage, and we probably don't want to go here because let's have some fun with this conversation. But it probably saved my life too
Mm-hmm.
in lots of ways. Um, yeah,
Well, it's interesting because a lot of sort of adventure people, jiu-jitsu people, they'll say some variation of jiu-jitsu saved my life, climbing saved my life, skiing saved my life, and here you are, essentially a climber, a skier, an adventure person, and you're saying that didn't save my life, therapy saved my life. So it's a nice switch up.
yeah. I do think they're related, though. I think if I hadn't
Mm.
had this person to go and be after the
Mm.
therapy, I was able to like get back into it, and I was proud for the first time, rather than being insecure about everyone who was better than me and how I was so obviously going to fail. Now I'm like really proud of everything I've achieved. There's so much more I want to do,
Mm.
but I'm kind of that. I've got a really peaceful approach to that. I'm really proud of what I've done.
Yeah. Uh, you said that you used the term bravery, and you were kind of um, ambivalent about it. Isn't bravery a good thing? The braver, the better.
I think bravery is a dangerous word. I think that we use bravery to mask issues. We can say to people, well, just, it's the man up thing, right? Just be brave. Um, I think bravery, that there's that issue. Sometimes you don't need to be brave. Like sometimes you can say, I cannot do this, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's I cannot cope anymore, so I need some help, or whether you're about to Jumar or ascend up a rope 1,000 meters off the ground. I mean, I could do you a very quick story with that. Like I
Sure.
was looking up at a rope 1,000 meters off the ground, very, very exposed position above the jungle. I've got one of my like ex heroes now, friends above me, Leo Holding, superhero rock climber. And I look at this rope and I can see it like sitting over this rock flake. and I know enough to know that doesn't look right. And I sort of sit there for 30 seconds, and I don't want Leo to see me scared or nervous. I want Leo to I want to just go up this rope fast and do my job. And I decide to radio up to Leo and say, that rope doesn't look like it's sitting right. Can you just pop down and check? And like, he's kind of grumpy and he's like, oh, fuck's sake. Like, yeah, okay. Comes down, flicks the rope, radios, good call. You should not have Jumard that line. So in a way, it was brave to radio Leo, but I think using bravery there is a bad example. Like,
Yeah.
the brave thing to do in the traditional sense is crack on, go up the rope. No, the sensible thing to do, I think bravery can kill, is my point.
Yeah. Well, as I've said before, the bravest guy to ever climb Everest is dead, and the second bravest guy to ever climb Everest is also dead, and the third, and the fourth. It's this idea of reflexive bravery. It's something we deal with a little bit in the fire department because you're supposed to be brave, uh, but anybody can make a mistake, right? I'm a captain, so I'm in charge of a crew or in charge of a large scene. And if somebody sees me doing something stupid that doesn't look right, I don't want them to be brave and Jumar that rope, to use your analogy, or I don't know, run into that burning house. If they see a hazard that I've missed, and it's entirely possible that I've missed that hazard, the
Yeah,
bravery is in speaking up. It's not in going ahead. Sometimes that's the only choice. Sometimes the only choice on is through, and that's a time to deploy that bravery. And maybe it works, and maybe it doesn't, and maybe you're dead, maybe you're not. But most of the time, discretion is an important part of valor and bravery.
totally. And I don't want, for a second, for anyone to think I'm anti bravery. I'm not. I am hugely pro bravery. I think it's a very important trait. I think courage is a good word too, and I think speaking up is arguably more courageous than Jumaring the rope. I think going to therapy is more courageous than not going to therapy. And I think, this is the thing about courage, right? And this is not my line, but I think it's a good line, is courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling fear and acting anyway. And I think
I'm
that's
pretty sure
so
that's a
true.
Mark Twain quote.
Is it? Yeah.
No, it is, or Winston Churchill. One of the
It's one
two.
of
It's
them.
the
One of them.
yeah.
We'll say it's mine. If you could just
Okay.
edit that in. Yeah, great.
Perfect. Perfect. Um, yeah, the bravery thing is is interesting. What about, well, before we go on and talk sort of at a higher level, let's just let's give the people a couple ideas of some projects you've been involved in recently. You did a really interesting project in South America, and you did a really interesting project in Greenland. And then in between, you've done a bunch of other stuff, but I think those are so different on the surface that it might be a good place to start talking about this.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, South America, which was arguably where my career really started to turn. So, that was a trip to a mountain called Roraima. And if anybody listening has seen the Disney film Up, um, Up was inspired by Mount Roraima. So, those amazing tepuis with the sheer faces and the waterfalls and the rainbows, like that's a real place. It's called Roraima. And I was there with Leo Holding, who I mentioned before, second big trip with him. We spent 6 weeks in the jungle, 3 weeks trekking to the wall. We airdropped all of our stuff out of a plane. It was so rad. It was like a James Bond film. Leo is a rock star when it comes to organizing expeditions. And then I say we
You
climbed
just
the
chuck
wall.
it out, or was it on parachutes, or
Yeah,
did
on
you couldn't have
parachutes.
long lined it?
No, no, no,
No.
no. Parachutes, and Leo got like the British paratroopers involved with rigging it up, and it was super cool. But then, yeah, we spent 3 weeks, 2 weeks ascending the wall, and I was just there to document it. Like, let's be clear, I'm not a world class rock climber. I'm not even a good rock climber, but I know how to go up ropes. And then off the back of that, and some fortunate introductions from some people I'd known in my past.
Hang on, before we go on, let's just dig into this a little bit. So we've got this. I don't know. I think of it as like a mesa covered in jungle
Yeah,
with the top in clouds and then vegetation all up the sides.
yeah,
And so, what was the actual climb? You climbed a cliff part of that,
yeah.
or
So, I mean, the best way to imagine it is almost like a desk, you sat at a desk and you've just got jungle flowing all over the carpet underneath you, and then you've just got this sheer wall on every side with a perfectly flat top. And they call them tepuis, and
Is
they're
that
just these.
a denser piece of rock that's been eroded around, or how do those form?
I don't know the answer to that. I
Uh,
mean, that would make logical sense. I think there's so much water flowing through that region that it must be um, water formed, because I guess there's no fault lines there. I could be wrong about that. Don't fact check. Fact check me there. That's
yeah.
fake news probably. But they are incredible structures. It's like no other landscape on Earth. And like you say, this jungle. It's the Amazon rainforest. So you've just got this
Mm.
pristine Amazon rainforest. It's all you can see for miles, and then these like tables of rock just sticking out of the ground. Um, and all we wanted to do there, it was a rip roaring adventure. Like we wanted to say I was there to document it, right? Like they wanted to make the first free ascent. And for those listening who aren't super au fait with climbing, by free I don't mean solo, with no ropes. I mean using only hands and feet to ascend the wall, but using ropes in case of a fall. So they're not pulling on any gear. They're not aid climbing. Um, and really interesting twist on this. So there's been some very, very justified pushback on the amount of films being made about white men climbing mountains. Like, I think those films are important. I think we should keep making them, but I also think we should make films about people who aren't white men climbing mountains. We can do both simultaneously, right?
Mm-hmm.
Binary is not the only answer. Um, but what Leo wanted to do on that trip was go anti-colonial, which is super cool. So often these trips, you hire local guides, local porters, you pay them really well, based on what they're actually looking for cash wise. They walk your stuff to the base of the wall and then they leave. And Leo was like, well, this is these guys' sacred mountain. We've got their blessing to climb it. Why don't we see if two of them want to come with us? And so
Mm.
we had this big porter team, like maybe 20 people. Then we went into what was like 45-degree jungle, which sucked for like 5 days. And the porter team dropped down to six. And at the end, only two of them wanted to come, which was great because we only had two harnesses. And then my friend Waldo taught these guys rope work at the base of the wall. And they're wearing like gum boots. And they climbed the whole wall with us. They slept in the portaledge camps. We lived on the wall in portaledges, like hanging tents. And these guys lived up there with us, sang us songs at breakfast time and helped us haul the bags. And they were the first, Akawayo is the name of their people, first Akawayo Amerindians to stand on top of their sacred mountain. And Leo put it really well. He was like, it's the ultimate trade off because we couldn't get to the bottom of that mountain without them, and they couldn't get to the top without us. It
Mm.
just felt beautiful. Yeah.
That's a
And,
Neil
and then
Armstrong style line if I've ever heard one.
totally, Leo's good at those.
So, explain to me the mechanics of filming this. You say, I'm sure you're downplaying it. You say you're not a good climber, yet you're filming this. So, if you're going to be filming Leo climbing up at you from below, he's got to climb up first, then you've got to climb the ropes, then he's got to go back down, and then he's got to repeat that?
Yep.
Is
Yeah.
that how that works?
Yeah. And that's why Leo is the master, because most of the time on these sorts of trips, you film what you can from below. And now these days, you fly drones a lot. Um, what Leo gets, because he's as much a producer as he is a climber, and he's a professional athlete, right? He plays the game well, and that's why he's been so successful. As he gets, you've got to reclimb stuff, and often it's the hard stuff. So yeah, I think 3 or 4 pitches on that wall. We were running low on time anyway, but Leo, he's like, right, Matt, this is the one. This is the time. I've told him which pitches I want, and I go up the ropes. I drop them down, and then he climbs back up to me. Um,
So,
but so much of these films, if you actually watch them, that one little plug is called House of the Gods, and so little of that film is rock climbing in the grand scheme of things, right? The
mm,
rest of it is what happened around it. So hauling the bags, living on the wall, getting to the wall, interacting with the Akawayo, living in these camps. Um, so you don't, if you shoot those 4 pitches really well, because climbing's slow, you might get 20 minutes of footage out of each pitch. Well, we don't need 80 minutes of climbing footage for a 45-minute film. So
yeah.
you don't need to do much. You just need to do a little bit really well. Um, and it is a natural segue into what I then went on to do with National Geographic, because I'd accidentally developed a very, very niche skill set, which is what led on to what came next.
Dangling on ropes while working a camera.
Yeah,
So,
and
okay.
and and even broader, I'd say. Like,
Hmm.
well, if you want me to go there, I think what happened with
Sure. Well, what
Greenland.
is a skill set that brought you to the next stage? I
Yeah,
imagine
well,
working for National Geographic is the crown jewel in your profession.
oh my God.
Uh,
I mean, it was the
but
dream. It was the dream I genuinely never thought I'd hit. And
so, what skills did you have to develop to hit that dream that you never thought you would hit?
well, I didn't realize I was developing them. So I didn't know. I just thought they were the best in the world and they were always Americans, who direct for Nat Geo. That's how it works. Um, but then Alex Honnold, star of Oscar winning Free Solo, was making this movie with National Geographic and a British production company, and they needed a director. And they'd crewed up most of the other roles. And what they basically needed was somebody who had, we were in Greenland, so somebody who has polar experience, is a polar specialist, which I am, mountaineer and a mountain specialist, which I am, can work on vertical and overhanging big walls, which I can, knows how to film as part of tiny splinter cell teams to like work on the wall and live on the wall. So I also need to be able to shoot, think about sound, think about the narrative and the editorial at the same time, manage Alex because he is professional talent and they always need managing. Um, and then work with the exec producers to make sure I'm telling their story, not necessarily the story I want to tell, and then manage a big team of 25 people because I've worked a lot in advertising as well on like car ads and stuff and PlayStation ads in remote locations. So I'd sort of accidentally, if you line all those skills up,
Hmm.
I've developed this really totally by a chance. It's like every skill I had, they needed in one role. And there's not a long list, and I don't mean this in a self-congratulatory way,
No,
right?
but it's
I'm
true.
I'm not the best at any of those things. I'm just pretty good at all of them. But that's everything I'm good at in one. So it was really fortunate, and I just went through a series of interviews, never thinking I'd get it, but thinking it was so cool to be asked. And then I get the call, like, you've got the job, you're going to Greenland, and it was the hardest trip of my life. Um,
What was the Greenland trip?
so it's actually just been released. It's called Arctic Ascent. It's a three-part series on Disney Plus, and it's Alex's like kind of graduation piece from Free Solo. Basically, it's what's Alex doing next. And Alex is a climate. He hates the word activist. He's not a climate activist in lots of ways. He's a doer. He's an environmentalist. Like he runs the Honnold Foundation. He
Hmm.
pumps a third of his personal income into the Honnold Foundation, which is now significant. Um, and he pays for solar power in communities where they have no power that are going to be affected by climate change. And this film was to basically simultaneously go on an amazing journey through Greenland, climbing two incredible first ascents on the way, crossing an ice cap, and traveling with a French glaciologist called Heidi Silvestre, and doing genuine bona fide climate science along the way. So taking rock samples to take back for university. We worked with NASA, releasing a probe in the fjords. We did all sorts of stuff out there. Telling that story over 3 episodes. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
remember Alex Honnold talking about on a podcast. I don't know if it was yours. How when he got his first paycheck for doing a commercial for a company, it was I think 2 or 3 times the amount of money that his sister, who was a teacher, made in an entire year.
yeah,
And he was living in a van. It's like, I don't need all this money. What should I do with it? And that was kind of the genesis of the Honnold Foundation.
totally.
So
Yeah,
that's a great story.
yeah. What's cool about Alex is he set the Honor Foundation up before he was a millionaire. Well before Free Solo, and that's one of the things I think he often gets misrepresented online and in those films as like this super like on the spectrum, selfish, doesn't care about his wife, just cares about
That
he's
that that is how they spun it in Free Solo.
totally he's not
That and
like that.
that was a I but it was a big part of the I don't know the underlying humor of it, right? The count
Yeah,
the interplay there. But I've also seen how in editing you can create any narrative that you want.
yeah, and I'm not saying what they did was untrue. I just think that
Yeah.
a lot of his
It's
personality
an
was
aspect of the
emphasized.
truth.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
definitely not the world's most gifted empath, but he's a really caring person. Um, yeah, I like him, and I just think the Honor Foundation says it all. Like to set up an initiative where you donate a third of your income for the rest of your life. I mean, I don't know anyone else who does that.
Yeah. Yeah. He's he's walking He's walking the walk in addition to talking the talk.
Totally. I have huge respect for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were directing in
Y-
Greenland, or
Yeah.
you were organizing the expedition in Greenland? What was your role?
Good question. Well, I didn't realize the role at the start. I thought my directing job was going to be in charge of the story, the editorial.
Mm.
So, working with a director of photography who's going to be responsible for the camera team, and I'm in charge of story. And there was a series director there, like multiple Emmy winning, etc. But he didn't have enough wilderness experience to be able to work in every part of the trip, and I was untested. So the idea was he would make sure I was covering, 120 minutes of good TV. My role was basically to be the captain of everything. So
Oh,
I was ultimately responsible for the editorial and the narrative. I was responsible for how it looked. I was responsible for health and safety, and I was responsible for all logistics. So I wasn't doing all of those jobs. I was acting as a captain, and I think good leaders are surrounded by a team who are better than them at the things that they're leading them on. And so, the health and safety team, while I'm listening to them, the logistics team, I'm listening to them. But I spent a lot of my time in the evenings when everyone else has gone to bed on sat phones trying to work out when there's a gap in the weather for the helicopter to bring in 400 kilos of food because we've got 2 days left and we're in the middle
mm,
of Arctic Greenland. There's a thing about film directing that I think people don't get is remote location film directing. You're not just a filmmaker. You're a logistician. You're a health and safety expert. You're ultimately at the top of the chain in terms of people's lives. Um,
well, how many military expeditions have failed because they outran their logistics? How many? Uh, well, the area that I know best. How many Arctic expeditions have ended in tragedy, failure, starvation, and cannibalism because they didn't have their logistics done? I'm
yeah,
sure there are 1,000 equivalents in the mountaineering world as well.
totally. And I think that's definitely true. And then it goes even deeper because there's loads of cheesy lines, but like you can have the best plan in the world, but the reality is it's never going to work. And everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the face. That's the line, and we use that line all the time. And it's like
No
it
plan of
goes
action survives contact with the enemy.
exactly, and it go. I've never been on a trip where it's gone to plan. Like that wouldn't be an adventure. That wouldn't be interesting for me or the TV program I'm making. You know what is that? I think an adventure. Really, is a journey with an unknown outcome.
Right.
If you know the outcome, you're just out for a walk.
So, how long was the Greenland expedition?
That was 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Yeah.
And you did have resupply along the way if the weather cooperated.
Yeah, so that was
Oh, yeah.
very different to any expedition I'd done before. So because it was a huge National Geographic production, multi-millions, we had full helicopter support. I won't pretend for a second we didn't. But the
Mm.
thing about full helicopter support is helicopters can't fly when
No.
the wind's sideways and the fog's in. So
No.
there were really hairy moments. And the other thing about these trips, everybody thinks they're so like sedentary and safe now. It's like, well, what's a helicopter going to do 500 meters up a big wall?
Yeah.
you know. And I mean, the first wall we climbed on that trip, Pool Wall, you can't. I got some scars on my head from
Oh.
being hit by huge blocks of ice that fell off the top of the wall and like smashed my helmet. And yeah, there's Aldo came with us, who's an ex-Royal Marine sniper, and he just shouts ice, ice. And my instinct, whenever anything's falling, which is not necessarily a good thing, is not to do what others do, which is cuddle against the wall. My instinct is tuck my head into my shoulders and carry on filming.
No.
So I've got these
Yeah.
shots of Aldo like hiding against this wall, and he's looking at me. He's going, "It's like being mortared." And I'm like, "I fucking know it's like being mortared. I'm like a meter away from the wall filming you." Um, we're just getting smashed, and there's a really like kind of horrible video of me when I got back to camp that night with like blood dripping down my face, and like I've super glued my nose back together, and yeah, it's
Oh,
tough.
that's a great photo. You'll be super happy you have. I'm sure you're super happy to have that photo now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Uh, so, what has been your closest call on these expeditions?
I guess it depends what you mean, but I think there's a few examples. I guess my closest call you could say the Congo was the closest call. I mean, humans scare me much more than mountains.
Hmm.
But in the mountains, it was actually the first major expedition I ever went on. A place called the Mirror Wall in Greenland, actually only about 6 miles from where the pool wall decided to throw ice at me. There's a mountain called the Mirror Wall. The main face had never been climbed, and I was out there with Leo, my first trip with him, and my friend Waldo. There's a recurring theme to this cast. Like, you tend to go with the people
Hmm.
the bonds forged are unbelievable. And Waldo got really sick just before we committed to the wall. So Leo, we call him Captain. Like, Leo sent me down to camp, and it's yes, sir, of course, sir. Um, and Leo said, "You get down to base camp with Waldo, make sure he's all right. We'll be down later." And there was a glacier we walked up. We called it the Death Glacier. It was just like full of holes, full of snow bridges, trying to eat us. And we always walked up it at night, so it was more frozen in the cold. And we walked. I had to get Waldo down in the midday sun, and it was kind of like a movie. Waldo's like literally like erupting from both ends the whole way down. It was pretty grim. And so I'm like guiding him down, but not guiding him. Like, I'm leading him on the rope, and I'm falling through these snow bridges the whole time, like an ankle down to a knee, and then suddenly I go down to my waist, and I like turn my walking poles horizontal to try and get some support, and I push up, and I turn to Waldo, and I go, "I think I'm out." And as I go to say okay, the snow bridge collapses, and I just plummet like 3-4 meters, and I'm on this super skinny rope. Waldo likes using skinny ropes. He's probably the best in the world rope rigging specialist. So he uses this super strong skinny rope, but you don't want to be looking at it when you're relying on it. It's like
Hmm.
6 millimeters. And so I look
Okay.
down, I've got like 30 kilos, 60 pounds on my back. I'm horizontal because of the weight of the pack. And I managed to look down, and there's like 20 meters of air, and then this like fast flowing water that disappears into a hole, a moulin. And so I'm like, okay, if this goes wrong, I'm going in there. So I managed to like put an ice screw in the wall, take my pack off and clip it to the ice screw, clip a line to my pack so I can then retrieve it later. And then I'm wearing aluminium crampons, so I haven't got steel climbing crampons. I'm wearing walking crampons. I basically have to, like, rather than ascending the rope, I like shimmy my way out of this crevasse. It takes like 45 minutes. Um, and it's another one of those things that, like, at the time, I don't sound contradictory with what I said earlier about bravery. I didn't have time to be scared or to be a
Hmm.
hero. It was just like, right, Waldo's ill. I'm in this hole. I need to get out of the hole. So I'm going to get out of the hole now. And I kind of got out of this hole, pulled my bag up, and I'm like sat on the edge of the snow bridge. And Waldo's got his camera out, obviously. And then he just
Keep
looks at
filming
me.
no matter
Yeah, yeah,
what.
exactly.
Yeah.
He just looks at me. He's like, "You just fell in a crevasse." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I know." And that's it. Then it was over. And I think the weird thing about it on reflection is, like, that was it was over. We went down, we had some dinner, we went to sleep, and then we went rock climbing. Um, these things happen.
In the moment, it doesn't serve you to think about the big picture. It doesn't serve you to think about, to dwell on how close you were. I mean, maybe in retrospect, if you'd been there voluntarily, if he hadn't been ill, you would have been going, "Holy shit, I made a huge mistake. I'm never going to do that
Yeah,
again in the daytime." But you had no choice. So that how would deep introspection on that have served you?
exactly. And I think later, you can look at this stuff and use it to work out what sort of person you are. Could I have reacted differently? Am I proud of my response? And I think ultimately I'm just proud of my response. I've
Hmm.
sort of joined a club of people I didn't want to join, of people who've, self-rescued from a crevasse fall. I don't say that with pride necessarily. Like, I think it's much cooler to have never fallen in.
Hmm.
But knowing that I have it in me, given everything I've said to you, I want to say this with no arrogance there, right? Like, everything I've said to you about insecurity, pretending to be something I'm not, like actually becoming the sort of person who can self-rescue from a serious crevasse fall. I'm proud of that. Like, that took a lot of
Hmm.
work to become that person. I'm proud of who that person is.
You finally made it after faking it all these years. Yeah.
I'm working on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Continuous development.
Yeah.
How do you think? So, every single person in the mountaineering community knows a bunch of people who've died in the mountains. Every single paddler I know, I counted them up, 5 or 6 people I used to paddle with who've died on the river. Um, one of whom was my own brother. And so, how do you approach risk? I mean, we can say things like, "Oh, you're actually much more at risk in driving to work than you are out on the mountain." But at a certain point, that stops being true. It You might be safer uh, rock climbing at your local gym or on your local crag than driving to work. But by the time you're doing it on some frickin' cliff 1,000 miles from nowhere or crossing crevasse-laden ice fields, I think that algebra falls apart. If we still say it, so how do you justify well, we'll start with how do you justify the risk, and then how do you mitigate the risk?
It's changed, and I think this will take too long if we go into detail. But like, I used to justify the risk incredibly easily because I was like, well, if you look at human history, like what I'm doing now, I mean, my life is so comfy, and
Mm.
I see that as a problem. I think that's going to cause me issues. I don't like how comfy everything is. This purposeless kind of approach to life. I've got nothing to strive for, really. I'm so comfy. Um, and I used to be like, adventure is so important. Adventure is going to save the world ultimately. I really believe that. I still kind of believe it. Um, and I was like, it's my life. I have no dependents. Like, my parents would be sad if I
Mm.
died, but it's mine. Now I've got kids, and I'm going to, the cliches are all there, so I don't need to say them to you. But like, all I will say is I'm not just responsible for me anymore.
Yeah.
And I actually know a lot of people whose parents were killed in the mountains, or um, people whose kids have died in the mountains as adults. And like, I just do not want to be that person to my kids. Like, I want to, it's actually I'm proud of it. It's like selfless. Like, it's not because I don't want to miss my kids growing up or anything like that. It's because I don't want my kids to grow up without a father. So I struggle with it, is the honest answer. And I think at the moment I partly justify it because if I stop doing it now, I lose my income, but also I lose myself, and I could find another income. But I have a very, very healthy approach to risk because I've lost people I know, and I think, exposure is the actual threat. Like, I roll the dice more than most people when it comes to risk. So
When you say exposure, what do you mean?
multiple times rather than height or distance. I think, how many times a year am I rolling the dice? And it's a
Uh-huh.
lot. I'm going to go and roll the dice in March a few times. I've rolled the dice a lot last year. Um, and sometimes you're going to roll a one, and I just don't want to ever get into that situation. So I do absolutely everything I can to mitigate risk. I never work without a guide, despite like sometimes not technically needing a guide. If I have a guide, well, just because I don't need one, it doesn't mean someone else isn't significantly better than me. And now
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to think about it anymore. I can focus on being a film director. So, I mean,
Your span
again,
of command is less fragmented.
exactly, totally. And I think, one thing that really changed me was working last year on the second Nat Geo series, where I was absolutely, definitely in charge of the expedition. And I had my friend Waldo with me, who I've known for 10 years, one of the best logisticians and safety specialists in the world. And I deferred to him, all the time. And there were moments where I'd say to him, we need to do this. We're going to do it, aren't we? And he'd say, no, we're not going to do that because of this. And I know that for the production, we need to do it. But Waldo said no. So the conversation is over now. You know, I'm not going to say, yeah, but you don't understand how important this is to the execs. I don't care about the execs in that moment.
Mm.
I care about people's lives. And I think that's why I'm hoping, touch wood 1,000 times, I'm going to have a, you know, healthy, successful career. I also kind of want to say, like, I want my kids to live with passion. And this is a recycled line from someone else who answered it really well to me when I asked the question. I would be a fraud if I quit now. And I want my kids to, whether they want to work in a supermarket, be a ballet dancer, whatever they want to be, I want my kids to see me living this passionate, fulfilled life, doing things I want to do with my life. My wife's the same. My wife is a it's a vocation rather than a career. She's a passionate actress and soprano, and I'm really proud that our kids are going to grow up seeing us doing these polar opposite things that we're obsessed with. Um, and you take that away from me, well, then what am I?
Hmm. Do you think this is? I mean, you're speaking personally, but if you're to speak for the other athletes and sort of public athletes that you've worked with, do you think they struggle with the same things, and do you think they struggle with that transformation pre-parenthood, post-parenthood? I think that's a pretty big watershed for many people.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, how could it not be? I asked Alex on the first trip, thinking I was going to get some gold for the film, like, how has becoming a parent changed you? And he said it hasn't. And I was like, oh, come on, dude. Like, of course it has, but it hadn't. And he just hadn't had the time yet. But it does change you. And I think ultimately it changes you for the better in lots of ways. Like, it made me less selfish. Um, it made me more empathetic and more caring. But I think it's a very regular conversation. Is how do we still justify this? Can we still justify this? Are we kidding ourselves? Because you can come up with all sorts of reasons to keep doing it. At the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, for me though, and this might be unpopular, but I mean, if people want to email me and kick off, they're welcome to, because I enjoy a debate. Ultimately, I think the world is
That's Matt Pycroft at ghostscrewyourself.com, right?
That's the one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's yeah. Just listen to my opinion and leave me alone.com. Um, no, I love the debate, but I think the world is the Western world. Particularly the middle class Western world. We are too risk averse. We are too risk
Mm-hmm.
free. I think risk, adventure, jeopardy, gentle trauma can teach us a lot about ourselves, the world, who we are. Um, An adventure without risk isn't really an adventure. And I think, I'm personally pretty passionate about the state of the planet. And I think if you want to create environmentalists, they need to go and see what it is that we need to save. So, stick on your walking boots and
I'll definitely agree with that. I mean, I know several people who are pretty hard right wing, and it's strange. Left wing and right wing, it comes with your pre-bundled sets of beliefs.
yeah,
And if you have somebody who's, I don't know, right wing in North America, you can pretty much predict their positions on abortion, gun control, climate change, uh, whether the election in the states was fraudulent or not. Right? It's a bundled set of beliefs. But the ones I know who are very outdoorsy and have done a lot of hiking, and especially in the mountains, they jettison that component of, yeah, climate change is a hoax. They believe, in part because they're out there to see it, in part because they're exposed to media such as what you and Alex Honnold and uh, pretty much every every mountaineer I listen to talks about none of this. Like you, and there's zero question. I mean, you take a look at photos of some mountain house in Zermatt, Switzerland now versus 50 years ago, and oh, the glacier that used to be right at the mountain hut. Oh yeah, it's way up there, about 15 miles away. So it's interesting how outdoor adventure at least begins to fragment that clump of beliefs and at least redeems the climate change aspect, which I think is the most important thing that we're dealing with. Everything else is kind of a distraction from that. I mean, what's the point of, I don't know, pick a hot button issue, uh, freaking out about the 1 in 1,000 kids that's on puberty blockers, right? Trans kids, rah! When 50 years from now, uh, the world is essentially like half of the coastal cities are going to be uninhabitable. There's going to be refugee crises that make anything that we've had so far look like nothing, and you know, the densest population centers in the world are uninhabitable because of the extreme heat in the summer. It makes all those culture war issues seem stupid.
yeah. And I really struggle with it because I think ultimately it comes down to liberty. I think like a lot of the right wing, um, people out there are actually sort of pro liberty. What they're wanting to
Yeah.
say is, I want the freedom to do these things. And climate change is by its very nature anti liberty. What we're saying is, don't do this anymore. And I think that's the problem. That's the problem with the problem is we're saying stop. And we're not very good at saying stop as a species. I have I'm not going to agree, and my views on this won't be difficult to guess. Like, I'm pretty anti guns in hands of the public. I'm British, and I'm pro-choice. I'm cool with abortions, and I'm happy to say that. But but I'm also cool. I could go for a beer any day of the week with somebody who is anti-abortion and who is pro-gun. Like, I respect your opinion. I'd love to talk to you about your opinion kindly and calmly, but I respect it. I struggle to respect the climate change deniers because it's not an opinion. It's like flat earthers, right? It's like we can categorically prove that these things are happening. You are denying 99.999% of climate scientists' opinions. It's not an opinion. You're just finding a convenient way to disagree with it because it's anti liberty. And that I just
I
cannot
think it has
respect.
shifted. I think it's shifted over the last 10 to 20 years. We went from a phase of climate change isn't happening. Look, it snowed yesterday. Just out and out denial to it's happening, but it's natural and it has nothing to do with us. To it's natural and it's happening because of us. And guess what? It's good for us. To now we're on the cusp of it's happening, it's our fault, it's bad for us, but it's too late, so there's nothing we can do. I think these it's very similar to the stages of smoking denial, or the tobacco industry playing a delaying game, delay, spread confusion. And I think now that we're having these, I don't know, massive wildfires in Europe, massive wildfires in Western Canada. I've got
Yeah,
an Arctic expedition planned for this summer, and I don't know if I can bloody do it because there's record low snowfall all across the Arctic, and all the lakes are already way lower. So this river that was paddled, that there's a written record of from the 1800s, but I can't find any other records of it since. I don't know if there's going to be enough water. I'm going to be waiting for, you know, for 400, 500, 600 kilometers. I might be. So we've now moved on to the stage of it's happening and it's good for us, on the cusp of it's happening, it's terrible for us, and there's nothing we can do.
yeah. I think well, and just to speak to what you were saying, I was in Alaska last summer, in southeast Alaska on the Devil's Thumb, and we could see the fires. We could see the smoke. Like, we could smell the smoke. We were in Alaska, and they were Canadian wildfires. Like, you know, it's
Yeah,
serious. It's such a stupid thing to say. It's serious. Of course, it's serious, but this can sound pretty pessimistic. Largely, I'm an optimist. I'm kind of anti cynicism, but I think, in my opinion, my guess is what's going to happen is people generally won't react en masse until it starts affecting them. And, when the global food trade starts to suffer and the shelves are feeling a little emptier, when mass migration is happening, which is going to create all sorts of horrendous kind of racist, it's going to get even worse. Um,
it's already happening.
it's already happening, but it's going to happen, as you point out, at such a scale. Um, then we'll start behaving like we need to do something about it. There's just one quick thing that somebody pointed out in Greenland, which I thought was fascinating. Was I'd never thought about it. It's kind of naive, really, to not have thought about it before, but I hadn't. Is this Greenlandic dude, Adam, who was traveling with us and like looking after us? He said, "I get that it's bad. I think it's bad, but we're going to be able to grow tomatoes." And I was like, "Oh shit, you are." I was like, well, Greenland's pretty big, so maybe actually we'll just see mass migration to Greenland, northern Canada. Like, these wildernesses are pristine, and we should do everything we can to protect them. But Antarctica, I am not a climate change denier, right? But I also don't deny that we've been through various stages of this planet in terms of its
Sure.
temperature. Antarctica had dinosaurs and was a tropical rainforest.
Yeah.
It's just we're talking millennia, not human. We can't comprehend how long ago that was.
And how slowly that change happened, and the fact that the dinosaur, I mean, there were winner dinosaurs and there were loser dinosaurs.
Yeah,
The dinosaurs in Antarctica won, the dinosaurs in the middle of the big super Pangea, the big
Yeah,
supercontinent. They lost.
yeah,
Trouble is, the dinosaurs in the middle of Pangea didn't have nuclear weapons to fight over the remaining water resources. So I don't know. I'm holding out for nuclear fusion. I think we should have a moonshot times 10 for nuclear fusion, and failing that, nuclear fission. I used to be completely anti nuclear power. I think it's our only solution now.
yeah. I'm not educated enough to have a strong view on
No.
it, but I am pretty. And again, one of my best friends and I, we fall out about this all the time because she's you know, anti-progress. She's like, let's slow down. And my view is that's a pretty middle class opinion because the Western world, we've had our turn at progress.
Mm,
I think, everybody else gets to have a turn now. Like, try telling the 70 or whatever it is percent of the population globally who don't have hot water running in a tap that they don't get to do that. You
yeah.
can't do that. So I'm pro tech. I'm like, I'm no Elon fan, but tech us out. I'm pro tech.
Yeah. Well, so the films that you've done most recently, the Arctic Ascent and the is where are they available? If people want to see them.
So it depends on where you are in the world. If you're in
Okay.
the USA, Arctic Ascent's available on Disney Plus right now. If you're not in the USA, I think Canada and Britain specifically, it's on Hulu and it's
Oh,
on
okay.
Sky. I don't know if that you guys have Sky,
Okay.
but um, yeah, they're rolling it out in a really strange way. But that's where it's available.
Okay.
Um,
And
they
your
are
previous work?
Uh, most of that is available on YouTube. So I think if you want
Okay.
to watch any of the expedition films we've been talking about, the Mount Roraima expedition, that's called House of the Gods, and that's on Amazon Prime. You can find that pretty easily. And then if you really want to go back in time, first expedition film I ever made, Mirror Wall, is on YouTube.
Okay. And how do people follow you in particular? I mean, you have a podcast, you have your social media, you have all that, and you're getting better at it, right?
I'm trying. Yeah, I'm Instagram is the only one I really do properly, and I only post about 3 times a year. But I'm pretty active on there as a chatter. That's at Matt Pycroft, and then my podcast, which is very clickbait, titled The Adventure Podcast. At The Adventure Podcast, and it's The Adventure Podcast on Spotify, iTunes. Very easy to find.
Okay. Well, I don't think that's clickbait at all. I mean, that's exactly what we've been talking about this entire time. So, based on this judge jury of one, I grant you the title, the Adventure
Thank you,
Podcast.
thank you. And
Well,
as we
thank you so much
know,
for coming.
as a podcast host, your opinion is the only one that matters.
Yes, as a one, and as long as I run my podcast host opinion past your podcast host opinion, and we both agree that we pretty much
Yeah,
have quorum, and we have done our scientific, our basically it's better than science.
yeah,
We now
better
have
than science. Yeah.
yeah. Well, on that note, thank you so much, and I wish you luck with your next expedition, which is coming in March. Did you say?
Yeah, I've got a few
Okay.
weeks away. Yeah,
Can you
exciting.
say where you're going?
Yeah, it's not a major expedition in any sense. I'm shooting a ski film in Switzerland, which is
Oh,
yeah going to be a lot of fun.
all right. Well, have some fondue and rusty for me.
I will definitely. No, thanks. It's been fun.